They always said family is everything. But when I refused to give them the money I'd saved for my first home, they told me I was dead to them. And meant it. I worked 6 days a week for 11 years. No vacations, no splurges, no fancy coffees, no new clothes unless the old ones were tearing. I lived in a cramped studio apartment with moldy walls and a leaky faucet while my parents dined out twice a week and upgraded their phones every year. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself it was temporary, that one day I'd have a place to call my own. Something stable. Something earned. That dream came true last spring. I finally closed on a small but charming fixer-upper outside of town. It wasn't much, but it had a fenced yard, a creaky porch swing, and best of all, it was mine. I cried the first night I slept there on the floor with no furniture but a rolled-up hoodie as a pillow. It was joy, not exhaustion. I felt like I had finally done something good for myself. And then, 3 weeks later, my parents showed up unannounced. They walked around the house like they were inspecting it, nodding, murmuring to each other. I thought maybe they were proud. That maybe, after all these years of side comments about me, still renting at 30, and wasting money on nothing, they finally saw me. But then my dad turned to me and said, "You know, it'd be smart to sell this and help us out a bit. That way we all win." I blinked. "Help you out how?" He said their SUV was outdated, the air conditioning was acting up, and the new electric models had great tax incentives. It'd be a good investment for the family. My mom chimed in, "Plus you're single. It's not like you need this much space." I thought it was a joke. When I realized it wasn't, I told them gently but firmly that I wasn't selling. This house was my future, my security. I'd scraped for every penny, working overtime, skipping meals. I asked them how they could even suggest such a thing. My dad just shook his head like I disappointed him on a soul-deep level. That night, they left without saying goodbye. The next day, my uncle called me and said he heard I was being selfish again. That I wouldn't even help my own parents. He told me my parents were distraught and humiliated, that their only child had turned out to be cold and greedy. I tried to explain. He hung up. Within a week, my cousins were all reposting vague quotes about selfish children and failed family values. One of my aunts even unfriended me. I hadn't said a word to anyone. My parents had clearly been busy telling their version of events. Then came the final blow. I got a notice from the local registry. They'd officially removed me from the family's household record. In our culture, it's not just symbolic, it's a brutal act of erasure. I called them, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding. My mom picked up and I barely got a hi out before she said, "If you're not willing to help your family, you're not part of it." I was stunned. I asked, "So that's it? After everything?" She replied, "You made your choice." Then she hung up. It's been 5 months. I've been living alone in this quiet house, haunted not by ghosts but by echo-soft childhood laughter, holiday dinners, my dad teaching me how to ride a bike, my mom reading me stories when I had the flu. All of it feels tainted now. I keep asking myself how we got here. How money, earned through my labor, became more important than me. But the worst part? They did it without shame. No tears. No internal conflict. Just clean, swift severance. I tried reaching out once more after my birthday passed with no message. I sent a photo of the garden I'd built in the backyard. A patch of yellow marigolds and basil I'd planted in old paint buckets. I thought maybe it would remind them I was still their kid. Still trying. They left it on read. I started therapy. My therapist asked, "Why do you feel guilty for choosing yourself?" And I didn't have an answer. Because somewhere along the way, I learned that self-preservation was selfish. That unless I gave until I broke, I wasn't enough. But here's the truth. I'm not sorry I said no. I'm sorry it had to cost me my family. That's where I thought this story ended. But then came the twist. Last week, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from since middle school. Lisa, my childhood neighbor. We used to ride bikes together and trade candy. She said she saw my mom at a dealership, bragging about her amazing new car, and how her ungrateful brat of a daughter didn't get a cent from the sale of her old house, which she made them sign over years ago as a contingency if she ever needed help. Wait, what? I told Lisa I'd never signed over anything. That house was bought in my name with my savings. She hesitated and said, "Your mom had papers. She was showing them off to the sales guy like she was royalty." I started sweating. After digging through my files that night, I found something I hadn't noticed before: a folded slip, tucked behind my original mortgage documents. A second power of attorney form, with my forged signature. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. This was legal fraud. I knew then that this wasn't about family. It never had been. It was about control, ownership, entitlement. And I was done letting them take from me. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of betrayal, already unbearable, now felt suffocating. Forgery? Legal fraud? I could barely wrap my head around it. My own parents had pretended to love me, only to steal from me in the most calculated way. It wasn't just emotional abandonment, Anna Marie, it was criminal. The next morning, I took the forged document to a friend of mine, Elena, who works in property law. She took one look and her brow furrowed. "This is bad," she muttered. "No kidding," I said, voice tight. "No, I mean really bad. If they used this document in any transaction, bank, dealership, anything, they committed fraud. And if you don't act quickly, they might do more." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yes. First, we get your property records locked down. We make it legally known that you're disputing anything filed in your name. And second," she looked me dead in the eye, "you need to file a report." She nodded. "This isn't just about protecting your assets anymore. This is about drawing a line. If they've done it once, they'll do it again. You have to treat this seriously." I nodded slowly, the dread spreading like cold water in my lungs. The idea of involving the police terrified me. My parents might be manipulative and controlling, but they were still my parents. Would I really press charges? Then I remembered my mom's voice. "If you're not willing to help your family, you're not part of it." I remember being cut off, erased, gossiped about like trash. I remembered the silence on my birthday, the whispers from relatives, the house I built with my hands almost being taken from me without my consent. Yes, I would press charges. I spent the next few weeks tangled in paperwork. Police reports, notarized letters, property lock notices. I hired a handwriting expert to certify that the signature on the power of attorney form was forged. Elena worked overtime to secure my ownership. She found out that, luckily, the forged document hadn't yet been filed with the local land office, but it had been used to try and co-sign a loan at a dealership. The manager had flagged the form because something about it felt off. That dealership turned out to be the one where my mom had been bragging to Lisa. The officer I filed the report with said it might not go to court, but it would be documented. That meant if they tried anything else, they'd be on record. It also meant if I chose to go further, I could take them to court. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe they'd hear about the report and finally back off. But instead they escalated. It started with a message from my cousin on Instagram. "You really called the cops on your own parents? WTF is wrong with you?" Then another post from a distant aunt about the devil walking in children's skin. My uncle sent me a voicemail telling me I was dead to this family, as if I hadn't heard it already. And then one night I came home to find my front gate wide open. My flower pots were smashed. Someone had keyed the word traitor across my mailbox. I stood there, shaking, staring at the wreckage. The marigolds were ripped from the soil like someone had yanked them out with rage. The porch swing was cut down, the chains twisted and lying like metal snakes on the steps. I called the police immediately. They came, took photos, filed a vandalism report. But when I told them I suspected who it was, they just looked at each other and said, "Without camera footage or eyewitnesses, there's not much we can do." I installed security cameras that same week. Still, the damage had been done. Emotionally, I felt frayed. Spiritually, I felt exiled. And financially, I was already down thousands just securing my property rights and making emergency repairs. One evening, I got a knock on the door. It was someone I never expected to see again. My grandmother. She was frail, dressed in a faded sweater and holding a bag of what smelled like home-cooked food. I hadn't seen her since the year before. She'd always lived with my parents, quiet and passive, the kind of woman who nodded through conflict and never took sides. But now she stood on my doorstep with wet eyes and trembling hands. "I heard what they did," she said. I let her in. She sat on the repaired porch steps and unpacked the food without speaking. Rice, fish, pickled vegetables. All things she used to make when I was little and sick with the flu. I was too stunned to speak. Finally, she said, I didn't know about the forgery. But when I found out, I knew I had to see you. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't expect you to come, I whispered. She looked at me then, her expression firm. I didn't raise them to be this way. But I stayed quiet too long. Maybe that's why they are. For the next hour we talked. She apologized not just for what they did, but for what she didn't do all those years. For the times I cried in my room after being called selfish or lazy or ungrateful, and she said nothing. For every birthday she let pass because she was told you needed space. For the silence. She handed me a small envelope before leaving. Inside was a handwritten letter. In it, she said that when she passed, she wanted me to know I was loved. That she'd left me a small savings account she'd been hiding from my father. Nothing big, but enough to replace the marigolds, she said. I wept for hours after she left. It was the first time in years I felt seen. It was the first time someone in my family had chosen me over the illusion of unity. But then came the next twist. 2 weeks later, I got a formal summons. My parents were suing me for defamation and emotional distress. I laughed when I read it. It was a dry, exhausted kind of laugh. The kind that only comes when you've hit rock bottom and someone starts digging. They claimed that my false accusations had ruined their standing in the community, that I had damaged their reputation and caused them irreparable psychological harm. They were seeking $80,000. I brought the papers to Elena. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd fall out. This isn't going anywhere, she said. But they're trying to intimidate you into dropping the fraud report. It's textbook. Classic manipulation. I didn't back down. We filed a countersuit with all the documentation. The forgery, the dealership statement, the text messages, the vandalism report. I included every screenshot of harassment from extended family, every voicemail, and, most importantly, the expert analysis of the forged signature. The court date was set for 4 months later. In the meantime, the smear campaign got worse. A relative made a TikTok calling me a narcissist and got over 30,000 views. Someone from my hometown met me. Hope that house burns down with you in it. But by now I had stopped shaking. I had stopped apologizing. And I had started healing. I painted my porch. I rebuilt the swing. I planted marigolds again, this time in ceramic pots too heavy to smash. I didn't want war. But I wanted peace. And sometimes peace requires drawing hard boundaries. Sometimes peace is the sound of your own door locking behind you as you finally exhale in a house that is truly yours. The morning of the court date arrived cloudy and cold. I stood outside the courthouse in my best clothes, nothing fancy, just a plain navy blue blouse and black slacks. But I felt like I was wearing armor. Elena stood beside me, flipping through her binder with quiet confidence, while I tried to calm my racing heart. We'd prepared for weeks. Reviewed every document, every timeline, every recorded message. We had the forged signature certified by an expert, and we had the dealership manager on standby to testify. My grandmother, bless her soul, had even written a sworn statement after overhearing my parents bragging about making the brat pay one way or another. But still, as I stepped into that courtroom and saw my parents sitting across from me, my stomach twisted. They looked the same as always. My father wore his respectable dad sweater, the one he always pulled out for church and PTA meetings. My mother sat stiffly, eyes hard, lips pressed into a thin line like she was trying not to look at me. What hurt more than anything was that there was no grief in their eyes, no hesitation, no guilt, just cold, rehearsed resolve. Their lawyer began with a passionate speech about a child who turned her back on family and publicly shamed loving parents who only wanted what was best. He cited my police report as a weaponized lie and accused me of humiliating them in the community. I stared at the table in front of me, willing myself not to cry. Then it was our turn. Elena stood. Calm, professional, laser-sharp. She laid everything out. The sudden request for a house sale, the refusal, the weeks of harassment, the vandalism, and then she dropped the bomb. The forged power of attorney. The judge leaned in at that. Elena handed over the certified analysis, along with the dealership statement. The moment the dealership manager's affidavit was read aloud, I saw my father's jaw tighten. Then came the messages. Voicemails from my uncle. Screenshots from cousins. Posts calling me disgusting. A video my mom had filmed of herself crying in front of their new car saying, "We had no choice. She left us no choice." Elena ended with one final document. The notarized report confirming I was the sole owner of the home, purchased with funds verified as mine. No family contributions. No joint ownership. No legal transfer. Silence filled the room. My parents' lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. Then he looked at my parents. "Is it true you attempted to use this power of attorney to secure a loan?" My mom opened her mouth, closed it. My father leaned forward. "We thought it was real. She told us years ago." "I didn't," I said louder than I meant to. Everyone looked at me. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. "I never signed anything. I never gave them power of attorney. I worked for 11 years to buy that house. And when I refused to give it up, they tried to take it anyway. They didn't even ask. They decided." My mother hissed, "You ungrateful." "Enough," the judge snapped. The case was adjourned for 2 weeks, so the court could review all evidence and determine whether to dismiss their suit, and whether they could be held liable for damages. I walked out of that courtroom on shaky legs but with my head held high. That night, I sat in my little house and made a cup of tea. I opened the letter my grandmother had given me again, reading her careful handwriting by the warm glow of the porch light. Then I stood out on the rebuilt swing and watched the wind move through the marigolds. I didn't feel victorious. I felt gutted, but I also felt free. The next 2 weeks were quiet. Unusually so. No messages. No phone calls. Nothing. Until the day before the ruling. My doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed. It was my father. For a long moment I just stood there. Then I opened the door. He looked tired. His hair had more gray in it than I remembered. He held a folder in one hand and nothing in the other. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I just want to talk." I said nothing, but I didn't shut the door. He stepped onto the porch. "This whole thing," he said slowly, "got out of hand. I shouldn't have pushed. We didn't think you'd take it this far. Didn't think I'd stand up for myself?" He flinched. "You've always been emotional." I laughed bitterly. "No, I've always been human. You just never liked that I had needs of my own." He looked away. "I brought something," he said, holding out the folder. "It's the real paperwork. Property records. Signed releases. I want you to know we're not going to contest anything anymore. We'll back off. We'll tell the court we were wrong." I took the folder. Scanned the pages. They looked real. Clean. Final. "I wish I could undo what happened," he added. "But I also know we can't go back. You've changed." "No," I said quietly. "I haven't. I've always been this way. You just finally saw it." He nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw something flicker behind his eyes that resembled sorrow. Not regret. Not guilt. Just the dull ache of realizing too late what you've broken. He left without another word. The next day, the court dismissed their case. The judge cited insufficient evidence of defamation and noted the strong evidence of attempted fraud. No countersuit was filed. Elena said it wasn't worth dragging things out. But the judge warned them that any further legal manipulation could result in criminal charges. It was over. But the aftermath was just beginning. Word spread. Some relatives quietly apologized. Some didn't. A few doubled down, calling me heartless and vindictive. But other strangers started reaching out. People from my hometown messaged me saying they'd heard whispers of what happened and admired that I stood my ground. A girl I went to school with told me her parents had pulled the same thing on her after she inherited money from her grandmother. A man in his 40s shared that he'd given his parents half his down payment out of guilt and ended up living in a trailer while they bought a new boat. And suddenly, I wasn't just the ungrateful daughter. I was a mirror for everyone else who'd been guilted into silence. I decided to share my story. Not online. Not for drama. But at a small local event about financial literacy for young adults. I talked about boundaries. About the myth of obligation. About how love without respect isn't really love at all. After my speech, someone in the back raised their hand. "Do you regret it?" they asked. "Which part?" I said. They hesitated. Standing up to them. I thought for a long moment. Then I said, No. I regret not doing it sooner. There were tears in my eyes. But they weren't the kind that came from shame. They were the kind that came from clarity. Today my house is more than just four walls. It's a monument. A boundary. A sanctuary. I still miss the parents I thought I had. The family I thought I belonged to. But now I'm building something better. Not just a garden. Not just a home. But a life on my terms. And for the first time that feels like enough. 3 months passed. The quiet settled into something softer. Something more permanent. I still got the occasional message from someone on the fringes of my family, usually anonymous and full of venom, but they no longer carried the weight they once did. I had a lockbox now not just for my legal documents but for my peace. My grandmother visited twice a month. She brought soup and tiny bags of sugar-coated tamarind candies she knew I liked as a kid. We didn't talk much about what happened. Instead, we talked about her garden growing up, about the dresses she used to sew herself because they couldn't afford store-bought ones, about the radio shows she loved before TV took over the world. Her stories rooted me in something deeper than blood, something chosen. Something ancestral but not inherited by force. One day she brought a box of photo albums. Inside were pictures of me as a child, ones I didn't even know existed. Me with cake on my cheeks, me asleep on my dad's chest, me grinning in my mom's lap. I studied them like they were fossils. These were real ones, she said softly. They didn't start off cruel. I know, I whispered. But they lost themselves, she added. And you didn't. I cried that night. Not out of grief. Out of relief. That I'd survived. And then an unexpected email landed in my inbox. Subject: Request for reconnection. It was from my mother. She wrote, "Your father is sick. He's not doing well. We may have made mistakes, but family is still family. You're still our daughter, even if things were said we didn't mean." My heart clenched. There it was again. The pull of guilt disguised as love. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to run to the hospital just like a daughter should. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. Or maybe I never had been. I showed the email to my therapist. She looked at me carefully and asked, "What part of this makes you feel responsible?" I blinked. "The part where he's sick. That's still my dad." "Is it?" she asked gently. "Or is that the memory of someone who doesn't exist anymore?" Her question hit me like a wave. It wasn't about denying the bond. It was about recognizing when the bond had been poisoned. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't go to the hospital. But I sent a message to my grandmother and told her she could share my contact with any individual family member who wanted to reconnect in good faith. Not guilt. Not manipulation. Not groupthink. Just people. One-on-one. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from my younger cousin Sarah. She was barely 16 when everything blew up. We hadn't spoken since her last birthday party. The one where I bought her a sketchpad and everyone mocked me for giving cheap gifts. In the letter she wrote, "I didn't know what was happening. I just repeated what my dad said. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how brave you were. I don't think I could have stood up to them like you did. I hope I can come see you someday." I cried reading it. There's something healing about being seen by someone who once ignored you. It doesn't fix everything, but it softens the scars. We met a month later. She brought her sketchbook, the same one I had given her, and showed me how full it was. Beautiful, delicate drawings. Mostly nature. Some portraits. One of them was me, sitting on a porch surrounded by marigolds. I framed it. Life didn't suddenly become a fairy tale, but it got quieter, calmer. And in that calm I began to rebuild more than just walls and swings. I rebuilt myself. I started hosting small gatherings. A few coworkers. A neighbor I'd never spoken to but always waved at. A woman from therapy group who'd been disowned by her own family for coming out. We shared stories. We ate meals. We watered plants. We exchanged phone numbers. It was community. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you make. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was just rants and messy thoughts. But soon it became reflections. Then small essays. Then articles. One got picked up by a local publication. Then another by a national outlet. People started reaching out. Hundreds of emails. Messages from strangers saying, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. Some said they were now reconsidering how they allowed their parents to guilt them into staying in debt, in bad marriages and suffocating roles. Some said they finally understood why they felt so wrong, even when they did everything right. It stunned me that my story could do that. That telling the truth, even a painful one, could become medicine for others. Then one day I got a small package in the mail. No name, just a return address from a town 2 states over. Inside was a keychain. It had the word "enough" engraved in gold, and a folded piece of paper that simply said, "For the house you refused to give up. For the self you finally chose. You are enough." I never found out who sent it, but I clipped it onto my keys and carried it with me everywhere. Eventually, I planted a full marigold garden in the back of the house. My grandmother helped, even though her knees weren't what they used to be. We drank lemonade and laughed every time she nearly fell backward pulling weeds. One evening while we rested in the shade, she turned to me and said, "You broke the pattern, you know." "What pattern?" "The lie that children owe their parents more than they owe themselves." I was silent. She added, "I never had the courage. I watched them break things and said nothing. But you," she touched my shoulder, "you burned the script." And I did. Not out of revenge. Not out of pride. But because peace is a precious thing. And you cannot build peace on the foundation of control. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day I'll hear that my father passed. Maybe my mother will try again to worm her way back in. Maybe my family tree will always be more thorn than flower. But now I know this. Blood is not a contract. And family is not made of demands. It is made of choice. And I choose me. I choose my home. I choose this life I carved out of stone and silence and survival. And every morning when I swing gently on my porch with a mug of tea in hand and the marigolds swaying around me, I remind myself of that truth. I am not selfish. I am not broken. I am not theirs. I am free.